side, they don't go through the expense of printing on that, so it's usually white, right? And it's usually opaque, it's not very shiny. But on the other side, you get all this great four-color printing now, and they'll do foil, so it can be shiny. It can have different diffuse values than the other side. So you get a lot of options this way, and you don't have to. The trick that I used to do in the past is create two polygons and weld them together, but they were both facing different directions, right? It's extra geometry. You can also get render errors if you were doing cloth dynamics and it starts bending. It could start poking through. So now I don't have to. Now I have to go back and fold that. But and so now I don't have to do that. Okay, so that's the node system. Now, the other thing that I've been using this for, I'm going to just slide this over here, and I'm going to go and find some images. Okay, that looks like a pretty good image there. And we'll use this one too. Okay, so I've loaded these two images, and I'm going to, so far I've just been using procedural textures, but remember, I can use images, gradients, procedural textures. So what I'm going to do is, well, actually, let me just grab the same flow that I have here and feed that back into my color. Okay, but this time on my crackle texture, I'm going to feed some images into my procedural. So I've been pulling from 3D textures because procedural textures are seamless by nature. They're going to just keep repeating. But 2D textures, well, we have some procedural 2D textures that are great, like planks and parquet, so for doing flooring and things like that, that you really only need it on one axis. But I'm going to use image, feed it over here, and I'm going to feed that into the background color of my texture and pick, I'll just pick this texture. And then I'm going to move this up. I'll go ahead and copy it. I don't have to keep pulling from that. I can just copy and paste. And I'm going to feed this into the foreground color. Right now it's the same texture, but I'll just go and change that. Okay. And so now what I'm doing is I'm using a procedural texture, okay, that is blending two images together. Right? Now, I'm not limited to just using a procedural texture. What I've been doing, remember, I can feed anything to each key of a gradient, feed a different image in. Right? Now, in the layer system, you could blend layers together with a gradient, but it wouldn't be a gradient. You'd do, for every image, you'd have to have a gradient layer, image, gradient layer, image, gradient layer. So if you had 6, well, you'd have 12 layers, and then you couldn't interactively blend them because you'd have to keep going into each setting. So it's a great way to blend images. So what I want to show you now, I'm actually going to load up a sample scene. One of the things that the node editor offers us now is before Lightwave 9, everything was Phong shading, but we have new shaders that are available, and we'll take a look at that. Okay, I'm going to go to my surface editor, node editor, and instead of doing the easy bake oven, I'm just going to get rid of all of this so that we can build it from scratch so that you can see how to do it. And then I'm going to go back to opening up Viper so that we don't have to keep doing a bunch of renders. But by default, I do need to do at least one render to store it in the buffer. Okay, so I can close this because I get my image in my Viper window. Now what I want to do is, have you ever looked at what's going on the surface of a CD or a DVD when you move it and the light hits it? That's called anisotropic shading, okay? And we've got lots of new shaders with the node system, but I'm going to take advantage of the anisotropic shader, and I'm going to go ahead and feed that into my spec shading. Again, more channels to work with than I can use with the traditional system. I'm going to go ahead and double-click to open up the properties for this, and I'm going to skew this. I'm going to type in a giant number there and a small number here, and I already start to get my spec hit. Now, if that was a gradient, you could go, oh, well, I could just build that with a gradient. But what a gradient wouldn't do is, let me move this, do a render. The spec hit is going to be based off the way the light is hitting it. So that's something that I guess you could, with the node system, create some kind of animation that would try and match it, but why when it'll automatically match it here? But one of the things that, this looks more like metal and not the surface of a CD or DVD. I need to get the color in there to make it look right, okay? So what I'm going to do is just slide this over here, and I'm going to pick a gradient, and I'm going to feed the gradient into the color, and right now it's black, so we lose our spec hit. And I'm going to start creating some kind of rainbow pattern that you would see in this CD. So I'm just going to pick a few colors here. Slide these up. You can already start to see it right over here. Well, what I really need to do is fill up this entire gradient with a lot of colors, right? So I could go and do exactly what I've been doing, click a new key, change the color, click a new key. But really, I just need to repeat that pattern. So I'm just going to do a post behavior repeat and a pre behavior repeat. And then as I change these, it's going to change the repetition that's going to occur. Okay, so that kind of works. It's kind of a neat look, but it's still not what I'm after. So what I'm going to do is take advantage of my copy, paste, so I can use the same settings. I don't have to use the same settings, but it works out great where I can feed this into the input. So now I'm using the anisotropic shader to not only shade, but to drive the gradient, right? How it's displaying the gradient on the surface. And remember, once you feed something into the input, well, your input goes gray because you no longer have the option. The first time I opened up, let me unlink this. Okay. The first time I opened up the gradient, I said, where are all my options? Because in the layer system, I've got all these options. Well, it wasn't until I said, oh, okay, there's the input channel, and I just feed that in. My options go away, but now I'm not limited to the simple list that's in the layer system. I can plug just about anything into that input and have that drive the texture. Okay, so there's a simple setup for this. Let me go ahead and do a render where I spin this, so you can see it from a different angle. And as you move it around, it's going to start bending the colors around using the shader. Okay. So that's a quick look at running through the node editor. There really are no limitations. Every time I think that I've reached the end of my flow, I go, oh, wait a minute. And then I just copy that entire flow and then plug it into one